مشتاق. Oh my gosh. Goodness.
الحمد لله وحده وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على من لا نبي بعده وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين عليه من ربه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم. أما بعد, then to continue here in our third session on the subject matter of the battle within the heart, reading excerpts from the speech of Al-Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya rahimahullah ta'ala from his various writings. Having discussed in the previous talk the two causes for the health and the life of the heart, which are what? Knowledge and knowledge and certainty is the same as knowledge, and irada, which can be translated as intention or ambition, sincerity or love. All of these concepts are similar. And the ability of the heart to know and the ability of the heart to want, right? So a person is either misguided, because they either don't know the truth or they don't care. Right? Either their knowledge is out of sorts, or their concern, their ihtimam, what they want, is out of sorts. And so, having laid down that foundation and having built on that all of the functions of the heart are connected to that, I want to just mention something very briefly before moving on to the sick heart, which is that the ulama of Islam, they say that Tawhid has two aspects. That Tawhid, our belief in the oneness of Allah, Tabarak wa Ta'ala, has two aspects. How many categories are there for Tawhid? Three. Three categories for Tawhid. These three categories can be summarized in two aspects of Tawhid, or two types of Tawhid, you could say. And you are saying the same thing if you say this or if you say that. And they are Tawhid al-ilmi and Tawhid al-amali. Tawhid al-ilmi, the Tawhid of knowledge, which is to ifrad Allahi bi-asma'ihi wa sifatihi wa af'alihi. To single out Allah with His khasa'is, with what is specific to Him of names, attributes, and actions. Names, attributes, and actions. This third thing that is mentioned in the Tawhid of knowledge, its actions, ifrad Allahi bi-af'alihi, to single out Allah with His actions, is similar, or it is the same thing exactly in meaning, what is labeled by the scholars as Tawhid al-Rububiyyah, the Tawhid of al-Rububiyyah, the Tawhid of lordship. Allah is the creator, the owner, controller of all things, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first aspect of Tawhid gathers within Tawhid al-Rububiyyah and Tawhid al-Asma'i wa Sifat. The single Allah with His Lordship, which are His actions, giving life, causing death, providing, sustaining, etc. And the Tawhid al-Asma'i wa Sifat of Allah's names and attributes. This is what we know about Allah. We know that Allah has described Himself, and the Prophet ﷺ has described Allah with these names and these attributes and these actions that are His kamalat, that are His perfection. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we affirm them for Allah, as Allah affirmed them for Himself, and as His Prophet ﷺ affirmed for Him. This is what we know about Allah. This is affirmed for Allah and for none else besides Allah. There are none who have knowledge like the knowledge of Allah, who have the ability to do what only Allah has the ability to do. There are none who have wisdom that comes anywhere close to the wisdom of Allah Ta'ala, or any of the kamalat of Allah, and none who can show mercy like the mercy of Allah, forgive like the forgiveness of Allah, and all these sorts of things. The second aspect of Tawheed is called the Tawheed of action. Tawheed of action, which is also called Tawheed al-Ibadah, Tawheed of worship, or Tawheed al-Ubudiyyah, the Tawheed of Ubudiyyah. There is an alternative naming of the categories of Tawheed that is used by some of the scholars that means the same thing. The first is Tawheed al-Ma'rifah al-Nur. Al-Ma'rifah wal-Ithbat. Al-Ma'rifah wal-Ithbat. The Tawheed of knowledge is called the Tawheed of Ma'rifah and Ithbat, of knowing and affirming. Of knowing and affirming. It is also called the Tawheed al-Qawl, the Tawheed of statement, what you can say about Allah, and believe and say in your heart about Allah, which is your belief, and say with your tongue about Allah, and what you cannot say about Allah, what is affirmed for Allah, what is negated from Allah. The second type of Tawheed that is called sometimes the Tawheed of worship, and sometimes it is called the Tawheed of action, is called Tawheed al-Talabi wal-Qasd. Tawheed of al-Talab wal-Qasd, of seeking and intending. Of seeking and intending, of making one's intention sincere for Allah Ta'ala. And so, having that framework, knowing that all of Tawheed goes back to two things. I said a lot to make a very simple point. All of Tawheed goes back to two things. You can say knowledge and action, or you can say knowledge and intention. Because al-Ubudiyyah, anyone's worship of Allah, what they believe about Allah and how they worship Allah, that sort of thing, and what occurs inwardly of knowledge and intention has a direct impact on what happens outwardly. And what is more important, what is inside or what is outside? Are both important? Both are important. What is more important? What is on the inside? What is on the inside? What is on the inside is what we know about Allah and how that affects our intention. What we know about Allah and how that affects our intention. To the point that some of the scholars have defined sincerity, al-ikhlas, making one's intention correct, as ifrad Allahi bil mahabbati wal khawfi wal raja, singling out Allah with love, hope, and fear. These are muharrikat al-qulub, the main functions of the heart. All of the functions of the heart go back to love, hope, and fear. And so this is a healthy heart, a heart that knows about its Lord, because of what is said about Allah, by Allah, said by the Prophet ﷺ about Allah, and who loves Allah Ta'ala, and who makes their intention sincere for Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And so therefore, there is no such thing as happiness or bliss or success or any goodness in this world or the next, except by way of the Tawheed of Allah. There is no life for the heart, and no light in the heart, and no health in the heart, and no strength for the heart, and no vitality for the heart without Tawheed. Any person who wants to reform their self or their community or their society or their family, we know that Islah yabda, that Islah begins min al-adna ila al-a'la, from the bottom and works its way up. Right? Not like the Hizbiyin and Harakiyin, not like the people of Hizbiyah and political rhetoric and so on and so forth, who politicize everything. And who believe that in order to fix a society, you have to work on replacing the rulers and deposing the rulers and coup d'etats and so on and so forth. You have to involve yourself politically because, that's change you can believe in. That guy's from here, right? Change you can believe in. You know what that is, right? That change works its way down from the top to the bottom. But we know as Muslims that change starts with the individual. Now, where does it start in the individual? In his heart. It starts in his heart. So there is no islah, there's no way to fix what's wrong with people. There's no way to fix the ills of society and the problems of society or the problems of the family without first working on correcting beliefs and making and prioritizing what is most important, which is to work for Allah in the hereafter and making our intentions correct. So Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala here, if you have the book on page 17, the bottom of the second half of the page here, he explains what makes a heart sick and what makes a heart dead. What makes a heart sick and what makes a heart dead. And we mentioned in the first part of our first sitting earlier today, which is our second sitting technically, right? We mentioned that all of the sicknesses of the heart go back to two things, which are the opposite of knowledge and attention. And what are they? We say ignorance. Ignorance is part of the problem, but there's something else that we say is the opposite of certainty, just doubts and shubuhat and shahawat, right? Shubuhat and shahawat. To the point that, as a side benefit, there's a nice book and it's translated even in English. And a book is called كشف القربة في وصف أهل الغربة. كشف القربة في وصف أهل الغربة. Hadith, a book explaining who are the ghuraba. When Islam began as something strange, go back to being something strange. So two was for the ghuraba. Written by the great Imam Zainuddin al-Hafiz ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah ta'ala. And he explains who the ghuraba are by explaining these two things. The ghuraba are not the people of shubuhat, they are the people of shahawat. The people of Sunnah Jama'ah and Firqatu Najiyah, Ta'ifat al-Mansura, throughout time, they are the people who leave off the shubuhat as relates to the religion. And they leave off the shahawat as relates to their practice of the religion. And the end, for a person to be from Ahl Sunnah, he must be spared from the innovations of the deviant sects, which is the first thing. And for a person to be from the best of the ghuraba, a person can be from Ahl Sunnah but be a fasiq. Allah protect us. They can be from Ahl Sunnah but they can be a fasiq, fajr. However, generally they are a person of Sunnah in their creed, that sort of thing, and that person is better than somebody who is on innovation in creed. However, these two things, Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, doubts and desires. He has a lengthy chapter for each of them, mu'ayyada, and each of these two chapters being supported with an abundance of proofs and evidences from the hadith of the Prophet about ashratu sa'a, about the signs of the hour, the approach of the final hour. And to show us that these things are not just said and because they feel good and because they're buzzwords and so on and so forth. And Ibn al-Qayyim is not just philosophizing here, right? Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, everything that he says, he is bringing proof and evidence, and he is bringing things that have been explained in great detail by the scholars before him and the scholars who came after him, rahmatullahi alayhi. And so it's very important to understand what causes the heart to be healthy and alive, what causes the heart to be sick and dead. The heart that is sick and dead, he is going to explain here, and he is the heart that, and he is void of knowledge, has a deficiency therein, and it has a corruption in their intention. He says here, this is taken from the first chapter of Ighathas Mahfan, this particular statement. He says, وَالْقَلْبُ الثَّانِي ضِدُّ هَذَا. And the second heart is the opposite of this, the opposite of the heart that is alive, the heart that has knowledge and certainty and has sincerity and high ambitions and priorities and that sort of thing. وَالْقَلْبُ الْمَيِّتُ الَّذِي لَا حَيَاةَ بِهِ. And it is the heart that is dead, that has no life, that is lifeless. وَلَا يَعْرِفُ رَبَّهُ. What is it? What is the heart that is dead? The heart that is dead, he defines it. وَلَا يَعْرِفُ رَبَّهُ. The heart that does not know its Lord. The heart that does not know its Lord. وَلَا يَعْبُدُهُ بِأَمْرِهِ وَمَا يُحِبُّهُ وَيَرْضَاهُ. 1. 2. وَلَا يَعْبُدُهُ بِأَمْرِهِ وَمَا يُحِبُّهُ وَيَرْضَاهُ. And it does not worship Allah with what Allah commanded and that which Allah loves and is pleased with. How do we know whether or not Allah loves and is pleased with the thing? لأنه أنزله وشرعه. Because He legislated that thing and He revealed it to His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do we know that? The statement of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, for example, statement of Allah, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. We know that Allah رضي بشيء لأنه شرع. And Allah is pleased with something that is something that will bring us close to Allah because Allah commanded us to do it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that thing for our guidance. So the heart that is sick is a heart, or a heart that is dead, He says the heart that does not know its Lord and does not worship Him with what He commanded. There are some people who say they worship Allah, but how they worship Allah, how they carry out their worship is nothing that Allah ever commanded anybody to do. Or they do it, and it's something that looks like something that Allah commanded in a way, with a modality, with a number or a time, with quyud and any certain particulars of how they do it. That is Allah Allah has revealed no authority for. Allah has revealed no authority for. And so they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the heart that is dead rather is a heart that does not worship Allah with His command, وَمَا يُحِبُّهُ وَيَرْضَاهُ, and that which He loves and is pleased with. بَلْ هُوَ وَاقِفٌ مَعَ شَهَوَاتِهِ وَلَذَّاتِهِ. But rather it is a heart that is waqif, and it is a heart that stands on the side of its desires and its pleasures. وَلَوْ كَانَ فِيهَا سَخَطُ رَبِّهِ وَغَضَبُهُ. Even if that entails, even if doing that incurs the wrath and the anger of its Lord, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the person he chooses his desires over what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. That is a heart that is dead. That is a heart that is dead. That is why there is a difference between a sin that is done by a kafir and a sin that is done by a Muslim. The sin that is done by a Muslim, Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, in his essay about qa'idatun fil mahabba, a principle about the love of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, he said that the Muslim carries out a sin, but to some degree, kariha, and he hates what he has done. He dislikes what he has done. His desires get the better of him. وَهُوَ, and he يَخَافُ, and he fears this iqab. He fears the punishment for what he has done. وَيَرْجَى, and he hopes for تَدَارُكْ مَا فَاتَ, yani to make up for what he has missed out on. He hopes for the forgiveness and the mercy of Allah. This is the Muslim. This is from the asal of Iman, from the core faith, that is the bare minimum for a person to be a Muslim, that they, to some degree, large or small, that they love what Allah has revealed, and that they hate when they fall into sin and disobedience, and they feel some degree of remorse for it. He said, as for the person who does not hate what he has, doesn't dislike what he has done, and the person who doesn't hope in the mercy of Allah, hope for the forgiveness of Allah, doesn't fear the punishment of Allah to begin with, or at all. He said that the person who was like this, laysa bi muslimin biha, laysa musliman biha. This person isn't a Muslim to begin with. There's no way for us to know that, however. Like what happens in the heart of a person who say that guy is not a Muslim. He doesn't fear Allah. How do you know? A man could be a drunk, a man could be a drug addict, so on and so forth. You know, the man who was lashed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and some of the companions and they sabbuh, and they sabbath him. And it was said about this man what? He's a man who loves Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You don't know what happens in the heart of a person. And the remorse and the regret that happens in the heart of a person, and the pain that he feels because of his weakness and that sort of thing. Nobody knows that except for Allah and that person. But the disbeliever, on the other hand, and he doesn't feel anything. Right? And he does what he does, not always. Always, because there are some people with some degree of religiosity with them who feel some shame, some remorse and that sort of thing, because of some religious belief that they have, some level of faith, and that is not even enough to be a Muslim, and they have a general belief that there is a creator and the hereafter and so on and so forth, and they fear the consequences of what they have done to some degree. But generally, this believer does what they do, and they believing that it's okay to do what they do. Right? It's okay. There's no punishment. There's no, there's no retribution for that. So this is a heart that is dead. A heart that is dead is a heart, that's dead. A heart that disbelieves, right? He said, so this person doesn't know his Lord and doesn't worship him with what he commanded and what he loves and is pleased with. But rather the person stands on the side of his shahawat and his ladhat. This is a statement similar to the statement of Al-Hasan al-Basri when he explained the statement of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala that is mentioned in 2 places in the Quran. Don't you see the person who has taken his God to be his desires? Who has taken his God to be his desires? He said that this is the munafiq. لا يهوى شيئا إلا ركبا. And whatever he wants to do, he does. And there's no pause in between him just doing and saying whatever he wants to do. So it's very important that the believer at any level of faith has muraqabah, always knows that Allah is watching and Allah hears and sees. The point of it is authentic hadith, collected by Tabarani rahimahullah ta'ala and Mu'jam al-Kabir, read to be authentic and the conditions of Imam Muslim by Shaykh Al-Bani rahimahullah ta'ala and Silsilat al-Hadith as-Sahiha, which the Prophet said there are 3 things. Whoever man fa'alahunna dhaqa ta'am al-iman, has tasted the sweetness of faith. We'll mention the 3rd of them. He said, وَزَكَّى نَفْسًا, and he makes tazkiyah of his nafs. He said, وَمَا تَزْكِيَةُ النَّفْسِ, and I asked the Prophet, what is tazkiyah nafs? He said, أَن تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَكَ حَيْثَ كُنْتَ, and that you know that Allah is with you wherever you are, meaning that Allah in His knowledge and His seeing and His observing was with you wherever you are. And muraqabah is the key to tazkiyah nafs, is the key for a person reaching ihsan. This comes in the hadith. Ihsan is what? أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. To worship Allah as though you see Allah. Like mushahada, like liqa Allah al-an. Like the arsh of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and He is in plain view. And the malaika are forming sufuf. And the people have emerged from their graves. How many people can worship Allah at that level? The person actually says, okay, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu. And that's sa'ab, and that's difficult, and it's not. And that's why it's the highest level of faith. That's why it's siddiqiyya and ihsan. That's why it's the highest level of faith and genuineness, veracity of your claim to faith, right? And how does a person reach that? فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. And if you do not see him, then know that he sees you. He sees you, right? This is how you get from there to there. And how you get to the highest degree of ikhlas is by way of al-muraqabah, knowing that Allah sees you. So the person who never thinks about that, and he never is mindful of Allah at all, he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care. And the more a person is like that, the weaker their iman will be. And if a person is completely like that, then it's a sign that their iman is non-existent. Non-existent is very questionable. He said, وَلَوْ كَانَ فِيهَا سَخَطُ رَبِّهِ وَغَضَبُهُ فَهُوَ لَا يُبَالِي. So this is the person who stands on the side of his desires and his lusts and his passions, even if that incurs the displeasure and the anger of Allah, فَهُوَ لَا يُبَالِي. That person doesn't care whether Allah is angry with them or not. إِذَا فَازَ بِشَهْوَتِهِ وَحَبْدِهِ. He does not care, this heart does not care so long as it succeeds in its desires and its health and its fortune and what it wants to get its portion of this world. رَضِيَ رَبُّهُ أَمْ سَخِطَ, whether its Lord is pleased or displeased. فَهُوَ مُتَعَبِّدٌ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ حُبًّا وَخَوْفًا وَرَجَاءً وَرِضًا وَسَخَطًا وَتَعْظِيمًا. سَعِيدٌ مَنْ وُعِظَ بِغَيْرِهِ. You hear how this person is and the detailed description of what has happened and the heart of this person who inside is like ظُلُمَاتْ بَعْضُهَا فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ, like layers of compounded darkness. Ibn Qayyim mentions 10 layers of darkness in the beginning of the Ijtima' and Nush al-Islamiyya. And the 10 layers of darkness that the believer is, the darkness of ignorance, the darkness of doubts, the darkness of insincerity, the darkness of his actions, the darkness of his statements, the darkness of his character. He's in layers of darkness, one after another. So the person hears this description, this scholarly, concise description of the dead heart, السعيد من وعظ بغيره. The person who was successful is the one who was admonished by way of how others are, knowing not to be like that. This person is destroyed. Who is this person? He is a person متعبد لغير الله, who is worshipful for other than Allah. And his worship is for other than Allah. What is worship? Worship is غاية الحب مع غاية الذل والتعظيم, highest level of love, the highest level of veneration. So his humility is not for Allah, his love is not for Allah, his veneration is not for Allah. There's something much greater, there are things much greater than Allah in his heart and more love to him than Allah ta'ala. He said this person, مُتَعَبِّدْ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ, and his worship is for other than Allah. حُبًّا وَخَوْفًا وَرَجَاءً وَرَدًا وَسَخَطًا وَتَعْظِيمًا. As it relates to its love, its fear, its hope, its rida, and it's being pleased, its sakhat, and it's being displeased and angry, وَتَعْظِيمًا, and as it relates to its veneration and its humility, وَظُلًّا إِنْ أَحَبَّ لِهَوَاهُ. He loves because that is in agreement with his desires. وَإِنْ أَبْغَضَ لِهَوَاهُ. And if he hates, then he hates what he hates because it goes against his desires. وَإِنْ أَعْطَى لِهَوَاهُ. If he gives anything of time or effort or anything of the sort, or wealth is or anything of the sort, he does so because it agrees with his desires. وَإِنْ مَنَعَ لِهَوَاهُ. And what he withholds from giving, he does so because of his desires, because of his improper desires. فَهَوَاهُ آثَرُ عِنْدَهُ وَأَحَبُّ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رِضَى مَوْلَاهُ. And so his hawa, his desires are more important to it and more beloved to it and have more precedence to that heart than the rida, and the good pleasure of its mawla, of its guardian, Lord and Master, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-hawa imam. His imam is al-hawa, is his desires. That is his leader. Wa-shahwatu qa'idu. And lust are its guide. Wal-jahlu sa'isu. And ignorance is what drives that person. Wal-ghaflatu markabu. And heedlessness and mindlessness are the markab, the vessel, and the vehicle of the person that moves him from one place to another. That is what motivates him, is his ghafla. And he is mindless, and he is in a state of ignorant bliss, that sort of thing, going from one destructive matter to another without even realizing that his heart is dead. فهو بالفكر في تحصيل أغراضه الدنيوية معمور وبسكرة الهوى وحب العاجلة مغمور. He said this person was a heart like this. His heart is wholly occupied, completely occupied with al-fikr, with thinking about how to get their worldly goals. And they are immersed and surrounded by the intoxication of desires and love for what is ajil and love for what is immediate. They're not thinking about long-term consequences. They're not thinking about long-term goals, that sort of thing. They are thinking as most people think today. I mean, this is something that throughout history, most religious doctrines and creeds and so on and so forth discouraged, but today it has become codified. Today it is the foundation of government and the economy and pedagogy and the education to the end of it. All of it is built upon hubb al-ajil, and the loving al-ajil, the loving what is immediate and following one's desires. He says, rahmatullahi alayhi, ينادى إلى الله ودار الآخرة من مكان بعيد. He said this person is being called to Allah in the hereafter from a far off place. فلا يستجيب للناصح ويتبع كل شيطان مريد. That's what he means by the far off places. Any type of inkling of humanity has left inside of his heart or inside of his soul is begging with him, pleading with him, and to come back to his senses. And there is some inner voice that he has that is a wa'id, and that is admonishing him or scolding him or something of the sort. And he is being invited to Allah into the hereafter from a far off place. There's a little sound that he has in his conscience, in his conscience. فَلَا يَسْتَجِيبُ لِلنَّاسِ وَيَتَّبِعُ كُلَّ شَيْطَانٍ مَرِيدٍ. But he does not respond to the sincere advisor, and he follows instead every rebellious devil. الدُّنْيَا تُسْخِطُهُ وَتُرْضِيهِ وَالْهَوَى يُصِمُّهُ عَمَّا سِوَى الْبَاطِلِ وَيُعْمِيهِ. He says that what angers and pleases the person is all connected to the dunya. And his desires deafen and blind his heart. فهو في الدنيا كما قيل في ليلة عدو لمن عادت والسلم لأهلها ومن قربت ليلة أحب وقربها. That guy was hard pressed for Layla, wasn't he? He said that in this dunya, it was like this person they called Majnun Layla. He was an actual historical figure. And they asked him, it was reported that he was actually approached by some of the Muslims and asked, was the thing with you and Layla and all the love poetry and everything like that, was there ever anything actually between you and Layla? He said, no, I don't know Layla. Somebody he had a crush on, right? But there's some poetry that's called the poetry of the person who was crazy over Layla, or Layla. It says, عَدُوٌ لِمَنْ عَادَتْ, that he's an enemy to whoever, and she is an enemy to. And whoever she doesn't like, he doesn't like him either. وَالسَّلْمُ لِأَهْلِهَا, and whoever is her peeps, whoever is her folks, whoever is her people, سِلْمُ لِأَهْلِهَا, he's at peace with them. Right? وَمَنْ قَرَّبَتْ لَيْلَ أَحَبَّ وَقَرَّبَهَا, and whoever Layla brings close and holds to be dear to her, then he loves and holds that person dear to him. And he said this is how the person is with the dunya. And his love and his hate is irrational. And his love and his hate and his like and his dislike, and he is completely connected to his desires and his want for what is immediate, and he without any thought about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hereafter and the reward and punishment of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. فمخالطة صاحب هذا القلب سقم ومعاشرته سم ومجالسته هلاك. What happens to a person from keeping the company of somebody like that? He says. And this is something that he speaks about in more detail in his tafsir al-Mu'awwidhatayn, his tafsir of the Mu'awwidhatayn, the last two chapters of the Quran, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ and قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, and it relates to the evil of mankind. And he talks about, and he associating with different types of people, and how some type of people being around them makes you sick. Some type of people being around them too much will kill your heart. It will kill your heart. And that is the disbeliever and the person of falsehood and the call to innovation and so on and so forth. They kill the heart of a person. He said the person who is like that, being in their company, the person of innovation, or the person rather of immediate gratification who has a dead heart, he said the person who was like that, he said associating with the person, the owner of this heart, the person who has a heart that is like this, is suqmun, and it is a disease or a sickness. Wa mu'asharatuhu summun, and socializing with it is like poison, it's like ingesting poison. Wa mujalasatuhu halakun, and sitting with him is like pure destruction. وَالْقَلْبُ الثَّالِث قَلْبُ لَهُ حَيَاةٌ وَبِهِ عَلَّةٌ. Then there's a third type of heart. It is not fully alive, it is not fully dead. It is a heart that has life but also has an illah, it also has some sickness or a defect to it. فَلَهُ مَادَّةً, and it is sustained by two sources. And what is taken into that heart is of two different types. تَمُدُّهُ هَذِهِ مَرَّةً وَهَذِهِ أُخْرَى. Sometimes one of these sources sustain it, and other times the other one sustains it or provides it, and what it ingests. وَهُوَ لِمَا غَلَبَ عَلَيْهِ مِنْهُمَا, and it belongs to whichever of these two prevails, whichever of these two influences are strong. And quite simply, they are, as we mentioned, the war in the heart, the war within, is a battle between the iman in the heart and the nafs al-amara. The iman in the heart and the nafs that is ordering him with evil. And this battle, sometimes it is called al-muhasabah, muhasabah to nafs, sometimes it's called muhasabah to nafs. There are different words for it. Self-accountability, and it is where a person, and it is literally what is mentioned, for example, we mentioned earlier about al-muraqabah, and being mindful that Allah is watching. And there's something, an inner voice inside of you that reminds you of that. It's found in the hadith of An-Nawas ibn Sam'an, found with Ahmad and Nasa'i and At-Tirmidhi and others. But the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا وَعَلَى جَنَبَتَيِ الصِّرَاطِ سُرْعَانٍ فِيهِمَا أَبْوَابٌ He gives a long parable, detailed parable of the straight path. Allah has given a parable of the straight path. On the path there are two walls with open doors. On the doors are suturun murkha, and loose drapings. At the head of the path there is a caller that is saying, "Ayyuhan nasu udkhulu sirata jami'an wa la tad'awwadu." Oh people, all of you enter the path, don't go crooked. From above the path, and in one wording, وفي جوف الصراط, inside of the path there is another caller. When إذا أراد, this is the shahid, إذا أراد أحد أن يفتح شيء من تلك الأبواب قال ويحك لا تفتح فإنك إن فتحته تلج. Whenever a person wants to open up one of those doors, go off path, go off road, a caller from within or from above, it says, ويحك, woe be to you. Don't open it up. If you open it up, you're going to pass through it. The path is Islam, the walls of the hudud of Allah, the boundaries set by Allah, the abwab of the maharam of Allah, the things that Allah has made forbidden. They are the doors. The caller to have the path is the book of Allah. The caller from above is wa'idullahi fi qalbi kulli muslim. The wa'id of Allah, the admonisher, the advisor, the counselor from Allah that exists in the heart of every Muslim. That exists in the heart of every Muslim. It's a voice within. The scholars, some of them they say it is the fitra. That is correct. Some of them they say it is muraqabah. It is what we just mentioned, a muraqabah of always knowing that Allah, reminding yourself that Allah hears and knows and sees, and so on and so forth. And that is correct. And some of them they say it is al-aql salim and qalb salim, all of these things. Some of them they say, as Ibn Qayyim, he said in Bada'i al-Fawaid, it is al-haya, it is shyness, natural modesty that you have. Some of them they say it is the fitra of the human being. All of these statements are correct. All of these statements are correct. It is all these things. And he is an inner voice that comes in many different ways to a person to tell him, ittaqillah rabbak. Fear Allah, your Lord. Allah sees it. Nobody else sees you. As Ibn Rajab mentions in Jami' al-Ulum and Hikam, in his explanation of the 40 hadith and Nawawi and the additional hadith that he added to the 40 hadith, Ibn Rajab, he mentions the statement of the Salaf, an explanation of the hadith, ittaqillah from the and you fear Allah wherever you are and whenever, at any time, any place that you are. And the statement of some of the Salaf that Allah revealed to some of the prophets in previous nations, لِمَ جَعَلْتُمُونِي أَهْوَنَ النَّاظِرِينَ إِلَيْكِ. And when they fell into shamelessness and sin and disobedience, Allah revealed to some of the previous prophets to say to their nations, why have you made me? Why have you made Allah أَهْوَنَ النَّاظِرِينَ إِلَيْكِ, the least important one that was looking at you? You would do things while you know that Allah sees that you wouldn't do if your mother saw, or if your friend saw, or if your teacher saw, or anything of the sort. لِمَ جَعَلْتُمُونِي أَهْوَنَ النَّاظِرِينَ إِلَيْكِ. Why have you made Allah the least significant one that is looking at you? And so this matter of al-muraqabah fi ghayat al-ahamiyya, and it is, as we heard, the definition of the Prophet for tazkiyatun nafs. The definition of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fi hadith sahih, as we mentioned some minutes ago, for the purification of the soul. The purification of the soul is to know that Allah is with you, watching you, and observing wherever you are and whatever that is. He says, so this person, lima ghalaba alayhi min huma, and his heart, and he has some dissonance and a conflict within it. Has some dissonance and a conflict within it, and it takes in some things from his desires, some things from the iman in his heart, and it ends up belonging to which of these two parties or sides prevails over it and conquers it and is most dominant. He said, فَفِيهِ مِنْ مَحَبَّةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَالْإِيمَانِ بِهِ وَالْإِخْلَاصِ لَهُ وَالتَّوَكُّلِ عَلَيْهِ مَا هُوَ مَادَّةُ حَيَاتِهِ. He says, it on the one hand possesses, and there is to be found within it, love for Allah, belief in Allah, sincerity towards Allah, sincerity for Allah, reliance upon Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, that is madatu hayatihi, that is the source of what it possesses of life. If the heart is alive, it is not thriving. It's alive, it is not dead, it has some sickness to it. And the source of its life is its love of Allah, its faith, its belief, its sincerity, its tawakkul upon Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala. But at the same time, وَفِيهِ مِنْ مَحَبَّةِ الشَّهَوَاتِ وَإِثَارِهَا وَالْحِرْصِ عَلَى تَحْصِيلِهَا والحسد والكبر والعجب وحب العلو في الأرض بالرياسة ما هو مادة هلاكه وعطبه. He says, but at the same time, there is to be found within a love for its passions and desires that are impermissible, and giving precedence to them over what he is supposed to do, and having a hirs and eagerness and a zeal to attain his passions and his desires in an impermissible way. Wal hasad, and it contains within it envy and jealousy. Wal kibr, and arrogance. Wal ujub, and conceit and being astonished with oneself and amazed with oneself, self-amazement. وَحُبُّ الْعُلُوِّ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِالرِّيَاسَةِ, and a love to have high status in the world by having leadership and authority over other people. مَا هُوَ مَادَّةُ هَلَاكِهِ وَعَذَابِهِ, that which is the source of its ruin and its destruction. That which is the source of its ruin and its destruction. وَهُوَ مُمْتَحَنٌ بَيْنَ دَاعِيَيْهِ, and so the heart is tested between these two callers. Between these two callers. Between these two things that are advocating polar opposite causes. And in between these two callers, دَاعٍ يَدْعُوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَالدَّارِ الْآخِرَةِ, there is an inner call within him, one that is calling it towards Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hereafter. وَالدَّاعٍ يَدْعُوهُ إِلَى الْعَاجِلَةِ, and a second caller that is inviting and calling him towards immediate gratification, immediate joy. وَهُوَ إِنَّمَا يُجِيبُ أَقْرَبَهُمَا مِنْهُ بَابًا وَأَدْنَاهُمَا إِلَيْهِ جِوَارًا, and in response to whichever of these two callers is closer to it or more accessible to it, meaning those that it is leaning more heavily towards will have the most influence upon it, either leading it to becoming all the way healthy or all the way sick to the point that his iman may be in jeopardy. والقلب الأول حي مخبت لين واعٍ. The first heart is alive and is mukhbit لين واعٍ, and it is humble, it is tender, and it is aware. وَالثَّانِي يَابِسٌ مَيِّتٌ, and the second heart ends up being one that is dead and dry. Ends up being one that is dead and dry. وَالثَّالِثُ مَرِيضٌ, and the third heart, the second heart, which was the heart that we described in the dead heart, and he is the one that is dead and dry, and the third heart that has elements of sickness and disease and elements of life and health and vitality, he said, is the heart that is sick. فَإِمَّا إِلَى السَّلَامَةِ أَدْنَى وَإِمَّا إِلَى الْعَطَبِ أَدْنَى. It is either closer to safety or it is closer to its ruin and destruction. Later in the same chapter, Imam Ibn Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi, he says, وَذَلِكَ أَنَ الْقَلْبَ وَغَيْرَهُ مِنَ الْأَعْضَاءِ يُرَادُ مِنْهُ أَنْ يَكُونَ صَحِيحًا سَلِيمًا لَا آفَةَ لَهُ. He said, and that is because the heart and other parts of the body are meant to be healthy. They are created to be healthy and sound with no defect. لِيَتَأَتَّ مِنْهُ مَا هُيَ أَلَهُ وَخُلِقَ لِأَجْلِهِ, so they can carry out, so that what they were designed and created for can be achieved and carried out. So we mentioned what the heart was created for was knowledge and intention, to know and to intend, to know and to intend. And so what is intended, how Allah made the heart and other parts of the body, is to be healthy and sound without any defect, so they could carry out their function. And when the heart is alive and it knows Allah and it finds comfort in drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is from the greatest of pleasures. It is the greatest thing in the dunya. The point that was reported authentically from Abdullah bin al-Mubarak al-Marwazi by a scholar before him, Malik ibn Dinar, from the latter tabi'een, that they said, مَسَاكِينُ أَهْلِ الدُّنْيَا ذَهَبُوا مِنْهَا وَمَا ذَاقُوا أَطْيَبَ نَاسِهَا, that the most unfortunate people in this world are those who depart from it without ever tasting the sweetest thing on earth. They said, وَمَا أَطْيَبُ مَا فِيهَا. They said to these great imams, Abdullah bin Mubarak, the imam of hadith in his time, the imam of fiqh, well-rounded in every regard, Malik ibn Dinar, who was a scholar, who was from the Ubbad, from the most righteous of people, and sahib of many of the imams of hadith, who they respected and loved and that sort of thing. They was asked, وَمَا أَطْيَبُ مَا فِيهَا, what is the best and sweetest thing that is on the earth? They said, مَعْرِفَةُ اللَّهِ, is to know Allah, وَالْأُنْسُ بِقُرْبِهِ, and to find an uns, to find comfort in drawing near to Allah and endearing oneself to Allah with worship. This is the greatest thing. And these are the two things that we said that are found all throughout the Quran and all throughout the Sunnah and all throughout the statements of the Sunnah. To know Allah and to find al-uns, to find comfort in drawing near to Allah, which is the second thing. To love Allah and to long to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to make Allah one's greatest ambition. This is the greatest thing on the earth. This is the greatest thing on the earth. A person who doesn't have this hasn't lived. A person who doesn't have this hasn't lived, to the point of Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, this is mentioned later on in this compilation of statements and selections from his writings. فَالرَّجُلُ كُلَّ الرَّجُلُ, that the true man is a person يَخَافُ مَوْتَ قَلْبِهِ, and who fears for the death of his heart more than anything else. He is more afraid for the death of his heart than the death of his body. This is something that was likewise stated almost verbatim very close to it by the great Imam Muhammad ibn Hussein al-Hajuri in his book, Adab al-Nufus, Disciplining the Soul. The great Imam of Hadith, rahmatullahi alayhi, died in the year 360 after the Hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because the worst that your enemy can do to you, if they took your life and you died defending your life or defending your wealth or that sort of thing, then you are likely what? A martyr. Or likely die as a martyr. Man mata duna mali or duna nafsi or duna ahlihi or shaheed. The person who dies defending his life, his property, his family, that sort of thing is a martyr. Right? He's a martyr. So the worst thing that you can imagine could be the best thing for you to ever happen to you, right? But if your heart was to die, if your body was to die, then the outcome could be something much more crazy, right? It could be kafara for your dhunub and the pain and the difficulty that you went through in the process of dying. And there are different things different scenarios of how people die. But if the heart dies in every situation, every scenario, it's the worst thing that could ever happen to you. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to you. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, وخروجه عن الاستقامة إما بيبصه وقسوته وعدم تأتي لما يراد منه كاليد الشلاء ولسان الأخرس والأنف الأخشم وذكر العينين والعين التي لا تبصر شيئا وإما بمرض وآفة فيه تمنعه من كمال هذه الأفعال ووقوعها على السداد ولذلك انقسمت القلوب إلى هذه الأقسام ثلاثة. He says, so the heart and every other part of the body and organ of the body and limb of the body, were created by Allah in a condition to be healthy and sound without any defect, so they can carry out the function for which they were created. And deviation from the straight path either comes from the dryness of the heart and its hardness, which prevents the fulfillment of the intended purpose, like is the case similar with a paralyzed hand or a mute tongue or a stuffy nose or a defective reproductive organ, or a person and he is infertile and an eye that cannot see anything, or due to a sickness and defect. So it's either because of the yubs and the dryness of that thing is lifeless. And the thing is lifeless, that there is nothing in it, and it is hard, and it is paralyzed. It's paralyzed, so it's like paralysis for the heart, or either because of his sickness, and it cannot carry out its function, either because it is completely paralyzed, or either because of a sickness and a defect that prevents the completion and the perfection of these actions and their accuracy. He said, and that is why we say that the hearts are divided into these three categories. فَالْقَلْبُ الصَّحِيحُ السَّلِيمُ لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ قَبُولِ الْحَقِّ وَمَحَبَّتِهِ وَإِيثَارِهِ سِوَى إِدْرَاكِهِ. He says the healthy and sound heart is the heart لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ قَبُولِ الْحَقِّ وَمَحَبَّتِهِ وَإِيثَارِهِ سِوَى إِدْرَاكِهِ. But there is nothing in between it and accepting the truth and loving the truth and preferring it over everything else except idraki, except understanding and knowing the truth. The only thing in between the person and guidance is that they don't know better. They never learn. And Allah said in Surah Al-Isra, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. And Allah was not going to punish anybody until He first sent a messenger. And so the person didn't know. And once the truth arrives, and they still have a fitra salima, meaning their natural innate condition that Allah created their heart upon is still intact, which is to accept the truth, love it, and prefer over everything else. But he says here, he says, then this is the only thing in between him and accepting the truth is, and his knowing the truth or not knowing the truth. And this is why Imam Nasai, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a tremendous book, a short, very beneficial book that is called Ad-Din al-Sahih Yahulu Jami' al-Mashakil. The correct religion is the solution for all problems. And he has a number of problems, and they are the most common problems of the world today. The first of them is the problem as it relates to religion and what is the correct religion. And he says that there are only two reasons why people go astray, and there is no third. It is either because of jahl wa imma because of kibr. It is either because of ignorance or it's either because of arrogance. It's either because of ignorance or either because of arrogance. And so the person who is jahil yu'allam, who is taught. People are here hungry for the truth. I remember many years ago when I accepted Islam, having grown up in a city that was full of people from the Middle East, from Lebanon and Palestine and other places who came over as early as the 1920s to work in the factories and to make money and so that sort of thing. When I was guided to Islam and when I became interested in Islam and I was trying to find Islam, and I was disappointed in the Muslims. So why is there nobody out here telling anybody, sharing the message? When we were younger, we were in the church, we used to go soul winning. You know what soul winning is? Knock on strangers' doors in the projects. If you were to die today, are you 100% sure that you will go to heaven? There was a little white boy at my door. Would you like to let Jesus come into your heart? These people go the extra mile and risk their lives, right? To call people to kufr, to call people to hell, right? And in our situation, myself included, is very negligent. It's very negligent in spreading the message, that sort of thing. There are many people that are thirsty for guidance, thirsty for the truth. And there's nothing in between them and the truth except for idraki, just knowing about the truth. If Islam was to come to them, I remember the first time I had like a real eureka moment. I was watching a VHS tape. It was a long time ago, a VHS tape. With it's a guy's name, Ahmadida, rahimahullah. He was explaining some verses, from the book of Isaiah. We grew up in the church. We was familiar with that. Explaining the prophecy of the coming of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And most of what Ahmadida wasn't a scholar, he was a carpenter. He was instrumental in calling many people to Islam. Much of what he said, from prophecies of the Bible, so on and so forth, and the scholars preceded him in, the likes of Al-Qarafi, Al-Maliki, the likes of Al-Qurtubi, rahmatullahi alayhi, the likes of Ibn Qayyim in his book, The Reputation of the Christians. Hidayat al-Hayar, fi Ajwibat al-Yahud wa Nasara. Hidayat al-Hayar, and like Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his lengthy book, Al-Jawab al-Sahih, min Baddana Din al-Masih, the scholars, they use these same verses. And this is something known throughout history, and it is from the means of dawah, but it is not the core means of dawah. You don't start and begin, and everything in between is, open up your Bibles to, the book of Hezekiah. I don't think it's a book of the Bible, whatever. Open up your Bibles to, chapter such and such, page such and such, verse such and such. And these people are here, these people are your neighbors. They're not really religious like that, most of them anyways. But I remember having one of those moments to say, what else could this be except for a clear description of a prophet who was going to come to the Arabian Peninsula, to the area of Mecca, and using other verses of the Bible to explain clearly this is what is meant. There is no, if you remember, if you were around back then, how we grew up, I think it was Wrigley Field. Wrigley Field, that's where it comes from. Right? As they say, Billy Graham and Jimmy Swaggart and them sorts of people that we watched growing up. Not we, but me. People who were Christians before they were Muslims. They had packed stadiums, tens of thousands of people would come to see these people and have, these revivals, these revivals. And one of the main preachers in this country, and scholars, we would call them, to the Christians, was Jimmy Swaggart. Everyone remembers when Jimmy Swaggart got by Ahmadiyya. Ahmadiyya tore that man to pieces in the kindest way. You know, Ahmadiyya kept a smile. He probably slept with a smile on his face, right? He tore Jimmy Swaggart to pieces. Every argument that he had, he couldn't handle this man. And that's something that Shaykh Umar Quinn, rahimahullah ta'ala, alluded to. And one advice that he gave to the Muslims, he said, you have people from the awam of the Muslims. Ahmadiyya by trade was a carpenter, right? Who can refute the ulama of the Nasara, the ulama of the Christians. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge. You'd be surprised that some of the most religious of the Christians out here, if you were to tell them the most basic things of what you can believe about Allah and the hereafter and the prophets and so on and so forth, it would be fascinating. It would be fascinating. They will want to know more. And Allah help us. Al-Quli, he says that the heart that is healthy and sound is a heart that there is nothing between it and accepting the truth and loving the truth and preferring the truth over everything else except for idrak, knowing it and understanding it. وهو صحيح الإدراك للحق. It is healthy in recognizing the truth, تام الانقياد والقبول له, and it is complete and perfect in its compliance and acceptance of the truth. That is a heart that is healthy, a heart that has knowledge, and a heart that prefers the truth over everything else and loves the truth. والقلب الميت القاسي لا يقبله ولا ينقاد له. And the heart that is dead and hard, how much time do you have? And the heart that is dead and hard, لا يقبله ولا ينقاد له. It is a heart that does not accept the truth nor submit to the truth. It does not accept the truth, nor does it submit to the truth. والقلب المريض إن غلب عليه مرضه التحق بالميت القاسي وإن غلبت عليه صحته التحق بالسليم. And the sick heart, if its sickness prevails, it joins the ranks of the dead, and and hard hearts. And if its health prevails, it joins the ranks of the sound heart. Ask Allah Ta'ala for sound hearts. Now we'll move on page 22. Take some benefit here. The heart is intrinsically unstable. I mean, there is a conflict happening in the heart. This is where the bala and imtihan happens for every person inside of their heart. Inside of their heart. This was alluded to by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This comes in a hadith of al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad. It was from the early companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Reported that the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, لا قلب ابن آدم أشد انقلابا من القدر إذا استجمعت خليانا. Now, if you have a copy of the book, you can correct something here that in the final edit that I just finished, submitted earlier, it was fixed. The heart of the son of Adam fluctuates more intensely than a boiling pot whose contents are boiling. That's a little redundant, right? Than a boiling pot. The heart of the son of Adam fluctuates more intensely than a boiling pot with its contents. Than a pot that is boiling with its contents. So that is an imagery for you. That is what is happening in the heart of a human being. It's like a boiling pot that is spilling out its contents, and its contents are spewing. Where are they coming out? What is happening in the heart comes out where? In their tongue and in their actions. In their tongue and in their actions. What happens inwardly comes out outwardly in their statements and their actions. The heart of the son of Adam fluctuates more intensely than a boiling pot with its contents, or than a pot whose contents are boiling, I should say. Similar, that hadith is found with Imam Ahmad and his Musnad al-Hakim and Mustarab al-Sahihain is rated to be Sahih by Imam al-Bani rahimahullah ta'ala and Sahih in Jami al-Saghir by As-Suyuti rahmatullahi alayhi. Likewise, the hadith of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, radiyallahu anhu wa ardahu, reported from Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, إِنَّمَا سُمِيَ الْقَلْبَ مِنْ تَقَلُّبِهِ, that it is called al-qalb because of its taqallub. It's called al-qalb. I mean, qalab al-shay, I mean, a person turns something over. And qalab, to turn something over. Qalb is called a qalb. And it is called that because the heart is called qalb because of its taqallub, because of its fluctuation. And it's constantly changing. إنما مثل القلب مثل ريشة بالفلا تعلقت في أصل شجرة يقلبها الريح ظهرا لبطن. The likeness, the simile of the heart is like the likeness of the heart is like a feather in a fala, in an open field or in a wilderness. تعلقت في أصل شجرة, attached to the base of a tree, like it is glued or stuck into the wood of a tree or something of the sort, but it is being turned over by the wind front to back, and it is being turned over, being blown by the wind. And this is the reality of the heart. This is the reality of the heart. And Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in a Da'wa Dawa and Jawab al-Kafi has a tremendous statement that kind of highlights much of what we heard about the life and death and sickness of the heart and the causes for it and that sort of thing, and how because of what a person is up against, temptations and the weakness of their own nature and so on and so forth, that they are in dire need of the help of Allah. They are in dire need of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. They are too weak and too pitiful to be able to keep their heart sound without the help of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. When he says, فإذا اجتمع إلى ضعف العلم عدم استحضاره. He said, when you combine the following things together, when you combine a lack of knowledge with عدم استحضاره, with the failure to be mindful of it, because a person can know something, but at the time that they need to act upon it, they may not recall it. I mean, they may be preoccupied, their knowledge of it is not good enough for them to recall it at the time that they need to recall it. He said, when you combine with the lack of knowledge, a failure to be mindful of it and to recall it when needed. He says, أو غيبته عن القلب في كثير من أوقاته, or its absence from the heart at most times. لاشتغاله بما يضاده, because the heart is preoccupied with with things that contradict it. And occupied with dunya, occupied with all the things that distract a person. All the things that distract a person. So a person is weak in knowledge. And the knowledge that they do have, they have a hard time recalling when they need to recall it. And because they are preoccupied with things that are the opposites of what they know. وَانضَمَّ إِلَى ذَلِكَ تَقَاضِيَ الطَّبْعِ وَغَلَبَاتُ الْهَوَى واستيلاء الشهوة وتسوير النفس وغرور الشيطان واستبطاء الوعد وطول الأمل ورغدة الغفلة وحب العاجلة ورخص التأويل وإلف العوائد. Then when you add to that a number of other factors, he said when you add to that the dictates of nature, what a person naturally wants, the dominance of their desires, and the control of their lust, and the tasweel of the nafs, the tasweel, the justification of the self. The self is making its sins and disobedience fair seeming and coming up with justification for why it does what it does. When you add to that the ghurur of the shaitan and the deception of the shaitan, and when you add to that istibta' al-wa'ad, the delayed occurrences of promises. The promise of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala may not happen immediately. What you hope to happen may not happen immediately. It may take some time. It may take some time, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in a well-known hadith, إِنَّ رَسُولَ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ جِبْرِيلُ نَفَثَ فِي رُوحِي أَنَّهُ لَن تَمُوتَ نَفْسٌ حَتَّى تَسْتَكْمِلَ رِزْقَهَا وَمَنْ أَبْطَأَ عَلَيْهَا وَإِنْ أَبْطَأَ عَلَيْهَا فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ. Indeed, the messenger of the Lord of the universe, Jibreel, just revealed the following to me, that no soul will die until it receives its wealth in full. وَإِنْ أَبْطَأَ عَلَيْهَا, even if its wealth comes slow. Even if its wealth comes slow. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ. So fear Allah and seek your wealth in the best way. وَلَا يَحْمِلَنَّكُمْ إِسْتِبْطَاءُ الرِّزْقِ أَن تَأْخُذُوهُ فِي مَعْصِيَةِ اللَّهِ. And do not be delayed by the fact that your risk is coming slow, that your sustenance and wealth is coming slow. Do not be compelled by the slowness of the coming of your wealth to disobey Allah. And do not allow that to compel you to disobey Allah. تبارك وتعالى فإن الله تعالى لا ينال ما عنده إلا بطاعته, because what Allah has with him can only be gotten by you by way of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says when we look at all these things together, the weakness of knowledge, the difficulty of recalling what you know, or being absent from the heart at most times, or at all times, or at most times, because you are preoccupied with that which is the opposite of it. When you look at the dictates of your nature, and you look at the dominance of your desires, and when you look at the dominance of your passions and how your self justifies evil to you, and when you look at the deception of the shaitan, wastibta'ul wa'ad, and istibta'ul wa'ad, the delayed occurrence of what has been promised by Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, wa tulul amal, when you look at how far off your hopes are, and raqdatu al-ghafla, the slumber of heedlessness, wa hubul ajila, and what most people are afflicted with, the love for immediate enjoyment, and the easy resort to misinterpretation and making ta'wil people, and they find all sorts of reasons, and they find all sorts of ways to reinterpret texts and prohibitions and commands and things connected to what we are to do and aren't to do and how we ought to be, and to suit their situation. So the truth becomes convenient for them, so they make the truth fit what their situation is. When you look at ilful awa'id, you look at the familiarity of routines and habits and what people do when people are just creatures of habits. Take all these factors into consideration and look at how they afflict all people. فَهُنَاكَ لَا يُمْسِكُ الْإِيمَانَ إِلَّا الَّذِي يُمْسِكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ أَن تَزُولَا. Then you will know that only He who keeps the heavens and the earth from vanishing and moving from their places can hold Iman in your heart. You need the help of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid you against the nafs, against your nafs and the shaitan. وَبِهَذَا السَّبَبْ يَتَفَاوَتُ النَّاسُ فِي الْإِيمَانِ وَالْعَمَالِ. And it is because of this reason, all of these things that are pulling on a person, and the various levels to which people seek the help of Allah or fail to do so, and beg Allah for His help or fail to do so, that people are at different levels as relates to Iman and as relates to their deeds. حَتَّى يَنْتَهِي إِلَىٰ أَدْنَى مِثْقَالِ ذَرَّةٍ فِي الْقَلْبِ, to the point that people's faith may reach the weight of the smallest particle in the heart. But there's almost nothing of faith left for the person. Is it time for the event? Yeah. So we'll conclude here. سائلين الله تبارك وتعالى توفيق السداد والهداية وسبيل الرشاد, وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We thank you all for your patience and your attendance and for your help. And we thank the administration of the Masjid and the maintainers of this Masjid, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless their efforts and to bless them for their time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow you all to be keys for good in the city in which you live. And you live in one of the largest cities in this country, the fourth, I think, largest city in America. Third largest city, that's big. After what, LA and New York? New York and LA, and then here. It's a big city. Allah, it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity. I remember Shaykh Falad ibn Dakar, Shaykh Falad ibn Dakar, he said on one occasion that it's easy for a person in a non-Muslim country to despair and lose hope because they're a minority. And he mentioned to me the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Ma antum bi ahli shirk." What are you compared to? The one hadith about 999 or 1,000 people will be in the hellfire. Right? At the end of Kitab al-Iman, Sahih Muslim. And the Prophet said, "Ma antum bi ahli shirk." What are you compared to the people of shirk? إِلَّا كَشَعَرَاتِ بيضاء على ثور أسود, except like straight white hairs on all black eyes. The people of darkness, the people's hearts are dead. It is like, straight grays and straight whites. And all this darkness, and all this darkness. He said, you know what that is? That's opportunity. All that darkness is opportunity. You have the opportunity to be miftah and khayrat and halal and shurur and afat, and the key to open up goodness, to be a lantern. And the Masjid, they are the houses of light, they are lighthouses and beacons in the darkness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tawfiq. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, we continue tomorrow evening at Masjid Tawhid. South Chicago. South side of Chicago. We need the address and somebody who knows. The same time, 6:30, right? 6:30 tomorrow.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Got a question?
لا لا لا.
It begins with إن رسول رب العالمين جبريل نفث في روعي.
This guy was sitting still all the
This is one of the only hadith that has this word ruhi, which is like the ruh. Something kind of the same meaning, right? هو لن تموت نفس حتى تستقبل رزقها. So it's hadith that I forget. So we were sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Halumma ilayya," and he come to him. Halumma ilayya, come to me. And he came and said, "Leave the messenger of the Lord."
So who was sitting with the Prophet? You said a group was sitting with the Prophet?
Yes, something like that. He said, one day, he said, "Halumma ilayya." I didn't mention that sitting. So they may have been sitting on this.
What happened? Huh? No, I'm just listening. This kid likes it when I play him. As soon as Shaykh is done, he starts moving around. Yeah, you mentioned those who precede Ahmad Didat. I think this might be the oldest number.
Let me say the name of it again.
كلام رسول الله نزلت على رسله التوراة زبور the mention of Mecca in the Bible. And he mentions some kings that claim that he narrates they saw the Hijrites.
So I guess you did probably know
Hard copy. Take a picture.
Here's the information too. And everything in the name is you got the Muhammad in them?